Michael Penix showed progress in what might be his final start of the 2025 season. Doesn't matter. We'll break down why it does on today's Locked On Falcons.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And of course, the Locked On Podcast Network is now the #1 sports podcast network in America, in the world, in the solar system, in the galaxy. And it's thanks all to you, the everydayers who make podcasts like Locked On Falcons your first listen each and every day. All you got to do to become an everyday subscriber, follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. Today's Locked On Falcons is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. So I'm your humble host, Aaron Freeman. Today, we'll be breaking down the all 22 of the Falcons' Week 11 overtime loss to the Carolina Panthers. We'll talk about Michael Penix's growth and why we'll stop short of assuming that you can just drop him into a more constructed offense and it will automatically click. We'll talk about some of our concerns about that, but some of the progress he showed this past Sunday and what could be his final start of the 2025 season if we don't get good news in the coming days and weeks about his knee injury. We'll talk about Kirk Cousins going under center and the Falcons play action passing attack actually looking halfway decent over this last month. And could we expect more of that over the next month that Kirk is starting, as well as we'll talk about how and why Bryce Young threw for nearly 450 yards. And it was mainly because Jeff Ulbrich was like, you know what? Jimmy Lake had the perfect blueprint to stopping Bryce Young. No, he didn't, but we'll talk about it. So let's talk about Michael Penix. And you guys may recall in the rapid reaction, we do the Penix pump meter, and I gave him one pump on that meter, and you can go listen to that episode to break down what that is. And, you know, basically I had a more negative opinion of Penix's performance watching the game live. This, you know, that can happen because I thought he was the accuracy issues. There were a couple of high throws in this game early in the game. And my perception watching it live was that there were more of those than there was. Like my perception was, you know, given that Penix only threw the ball 16 times in this game and maybe had like 4 off-target throws, and that percentage of like 25% is too high. Like you want that number to be closer to like 10%, maybe 15%. But you're talking about 25, 30% potentially in terms of off-target throws is too high a number. You know, 4 out of 35 being roughly the average amount of pass attempts that a typical quarterback has in a typical NFL game is a much more palatable number. That, you know, that's what, 11%, something like that. That's probably not true. Yeah, 11%, something like that. 11 point something. Anyway, and so rewatching the film, all that to say, let's not get into math, is watching the film, there was probably only like two out of the 16 throws that Penix had. So that percentage is much more in line with what I thought. Now, I did think the mechanical issues that were on display that led to some of the inaccuracy issues in the Germany game against the Colts 2 weeks ago were also prevalent in this game, but it didn't really affect Penix's accuracy. Like he wasn't necessarily playing with the clean footwork that we want to see that will enhance his accuracy, but for the most part, he was making the throws despite not necessarily having the cleanest footwork. Another thing that stood out watching the film, again, with a limited sample size, is I think he did a slightly better job attacking the middle of the field in this game. Now, a couple of those were like wide open throws, like that 40-yard pass to Drake London. And it's like, okay, well, he's wide open. And if you've been listening to this podcast for the last several weeks, when we talked about Penix's, you know, unwillingness to attack the middle of the field, it's mostly been when he's been pressured and throwing into tight and needing to throw into tight windows over the middle of the field. And, you know, that play where the basically the biggest window that Penix has probably thrown into all season long, you know, doesn't necessarily mean that issue has gone away. But I think overall you see small signs of progress. Now, the one concern I had in Michael Penix's game in this game that I think has potential ramifications long-term in the future, in a life after Zach Robinson, is Penix on a couple of plays still kind of struggles to kind of roll to his right. There was a play early in the game, I think on the opening drive, where he missed Darnell Mooney and sort of was late kind of there was an opening to his right. It was kind of his blind side. He tried to roll left, and then he went deeper in the pocket, and then finally saw the opening to this right, rolled right, and then missed the throw to Mooney down the field. And then there was an opportunity, I believe, late in the second quarter, right before the Falcons did actually score, so it didn't really necessarily kill the Falcons. But, they rolled right, and he had Bijan potentially open for a touchdown and wound up throwing it away rather than, I think he had an opportunity to kind of lay it in front of Bijan and throw a touchdown there. And the reason why we bring that up is because, I think a big conversation that is going to be ongoing over the next several weeks and months, as we get closer to the offseason, given, what we've stated on this podcast and the general perception, I think, from a lot of folks is, the Falcons need to fire, Raheem Morris and Zach Robinson in order to get better performance from this team in the future. However, I think the hot name in this year's coaching cycle, probably for at least as far as offensive-minded coaches go, is probably going to be Seattle Seahawks offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak. And we've discussed him briefly on the podcast in recent weeks as sort of the guy that I think a lot of people will kind of circle as being like, oh, man, if we get Clint Kubiak and put Penix in that offense, like he's going to take off. And I bring that up just because Clint Kubiak has very much of an under-center offense that runs a lot of play action, runs an outside zone scheme in Seattle and New Orleans, coming from the Kyle Shanahan tree. And so it's understandable that it's a natural fit, but it goes back to a conversation we've been having about Penix in terms of, is this style of offense with the Falcons run scheme, with them, running this outside zone run scheme, is this really a good fit for Michael Penix? And, it's the idea, and that's why we've been talking about over the last month about, how comfortable is Penix turning his back to the defense. And we'll talk more about, the improvement that the play action has had over recent weeks. And so he's definitely made progress in that regard. But because he doesn't necessarily show that comfort rolling to his right, it does kind of limit that style of offense where, if you're trying to build a Clint Kubiak style offense and drop Michael Penix in it, and you're like, we're going to go under center and we're going to run these bootlegs off of the wide zone and all that stuff. And if he can't roll to his right, then it's like, that's a problem, right? And so that's why, like, I sit here and I go, like, I think the narrative is going to be that all you have to do is upgrade the play calling and Michael Penix is going to blossom. And I don't think that's a wrong opinion, but I think it's very superficial, because I think what we have been trying to do on this podcast over the last month is really dig in on, go beyond the superficial of just like assuming that Penix dropped into a different offense and a better offense is going to automatically be better, because does he have the requisite skill set to really thrive in that offense, or is he just going to be more functional than what he already is, which is, again, an improvement, but it's not going to get the Falcons to where we want them to be, which is getting consistent top 10 level play. So I'm not saying that to write it off and being like, oh, Clint Kubiak and Michael Penix would be, it's a square peg in a round hole. That's not what I'm saying. But I don't necessarily know if we're calling a Clint Kubiak offense with the under center, with the bootleg, with the outside zone stuff. If that's the round hole, I'm not as convinced, as based off of what we have seen with Michael Penix up to this point, that he's the round peg that perfectly fits into the offense. Like, he may be a square peg with the edges shaved off. And so, like, you can kind of warp it in there. So I still think when we talk about Penix in his future, whatever that is, there's still areas of improvement. That's why we sit here and we talk about, like, the yellow and orange flags that need to get better. And we need to turn those yellow flags green and turn those orange flags into yellow, and not have any of these things become red flags and all these various things. So it's one of those things where it's going to be an ongoing topic of conversation, but that's the one sort of hang up that makes me go, like, I don't know if just putting Penix in a different offense is just automatically going to click. But, we're talking about the under center offense. Let's talk about Kirk Cousins. We got to see some under center offense from Zach Robinson, which we haven't seen really at all this season. And we'll also talk a little bit more about how the team navigates life without Drake London, as well as Penix's progress in the play action as we continue today's Locked On Falcons.
Today's show is brought to you by our friends over there at Peloton. Look, folks, it's time to break through the busiest time of the year with a brand new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus that's powered by Peloton IQ. It's Peloton's most elevated technology and equipment yet that gives you real-time guidance, and it gives you endless ways to move, whether you want to work out by yourself or if you want to work out with your favorite instructor, like my personal favorite, Alex Toussaint. He always gets me fired up to tackle the day. And the thing I like about Peloton, it helps me achieve more in less times. They have features that help you plan, stay motivated, track your progress, and Peloton IQ also provides personalized workout plans and recommendations. That's something that I use right now during the busiest time of the year covering the NFL. They plan my workouts for me based on my mood, my vibe, and also my favorite instructors. So make sure you check it out and use it because it also helps you correct your form in real time and it maximizes your reps. It counts your reps so that you can do it smarter, safer, and more efficient. Let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton cross-training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
Today's episode is also brought to you by Georgia Access. Have your health or family needs changed lately? Georgia's got you covered. Georgia Access is our state's marketplace for Georgians to compare, apply, and enroll in health insurance plans that offer the best value for their individual needs. Open enrollment is happening right now. All you got to do is visit georgiaaccess.gov today. Georgia Access, health insurance for Georgia by Georgia. So want to thank you all for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network in the galaxy. Can only do it thanks to you, the everydayers. Right? You are the people that keep me sane as we go through another down year for the Atlanta Falcons. I have to be there for you, the people, to provide you the daily content. And I appreciate all of you that consume that daily content. And you're the reason why Locked On is the #1 sports podcast network on the planet. But let's talk about Kirk Cousins' performance in this game. It was pretty middling. You know, you guys know me. I've been basically saying this for like 8 months. Like I don't want to talk about Kirk Cousins anymore. Right. We had 8 months of Kirk in 2024 or whatever it was, 11 months of Kirk. And now it's just like, all right, I'm done. But, you know, it was interesting. There was some early turn downs for Kirk in the middle of the field. We always talked about how that was Kirk's strength, and it looked like he was a little rusty. He got a little bit better as the game wore on. But I think in the challenge for the next 4 weeks, with Penix going on IR and Kirk definitely starting at least the next 4 games, is going to be life without Drake London, right? We know Drake London is probably going to be out this week. That's been reported already. But it's possible that he could miss more than 1 game, right? That PCL sprain that he suffered, you know, Ricky Pearsall had a similar issue. Brock Bowers had a similar issue with a PCL sprain. Pearsall missed 6 games. Brock Bowers missed 4 weeks with that. It was 3 games in a bye, and also tried to gut through 3 games before the Raiders shut him down for 3 games. And so in both guys' cases, those guys missed 6 games. And so we're going to sit here and we're going to hope that, you know, in those guys' cases, it was like, you know, a grade 2 or grade 3 strain or whatever it was, sprain of the posterior collateral ligament in the knee for those guys. And it's just going to be a minor grade 1 sprain for Drake London. And that's going to cause him to miss maybe a game or 2. But based off of that history, you know, and the thing about Pearsall is it was labeled a minor issue when he first suffered that injury and then he missed 6 games. And so, you know, it's definitely possible that, you know, both of these guys missed 6 games. Could Drake miss 6 games? It feels possible. And if he misses 6 games, that basically means, you know, he might be done for the year. So we'll keep an eye on that. And if Drake is done for the year, that's no bueno for the Falcons passing attack, because we know that the Falcons passing attack has basically been very, very bad when they haven't been getting the ball to Drake London. Now, the hope is that, you know, Kirk's proclivities will get Darnell Mooney going. We'll see. You didn't really see that come to fruition in the second half of this past Sunday's game. And, you know, Kirk and Kyle are whatever, you know. But, you know, Mooney and Pitts have been a lot more inconsistent. You know, Mooney all season long, Pitts definitely over the last month. Like we talked about how great Kyle Pitts was in that 49ers game. And then in the week since, it's just kind of been downhill for Kyle Pitts. You're starting to see the inconsistent version of Kyle Pitts with the drops, you know, some of the route running that we, you know, complained about for many years about him underachieving these past few years. And it felt like, you know, Kyle probably listened to that podcast I did. Like, hey, Kyle's doing great. And then he was like, you know, I'm shutting it down. And that's kind of what it feels like, where him and Mooney feel a little bit more checked out. And so we'll see if they can check back in just for Kirk Cousins' sake and for the rest of our sanity. But, you know, the Falcons did utilize some under center under Kirk, you know, 2 plays, which doesn't seem a lot, but when you factor in, you know, he only dropped back 14 times, two pass plays. They ran the ball under center a couple of times. I want to say like 6 or 7 times. But, so that accounts for about 14% of his dropbacks. About 20% of all of Kirk's snaps last year as a starter came under center. Only about 9% of his dropbacks came under center, which was about twice the rate of Michael Penix in 2024. And we've seen Penix only go under center for a passing play one time this season, which I believe came in the season opener against the Buccaneers. And this just kind of adds fuel to the fire that the main reason why the Falcons avoid under center offense this year has been because of Michael Penix. And we already know this. I was speculating about this back in September, and it's kind of been confirmed because if you guys have been watching the broadcast copy or the broadcast of several Falcon games, the broadcasters talk to the coaches and players in the lead up to each game, and multiple broadcast teams have talked about how they asked Zach Robinson about why are they using so much pistol, and basically Zach Robinson's response to them, as at least relayed via television, was that that's what Penix is more comfortable with. And basically the fact that we got, I want to say within Kirk's first 5 or 6 throws, some under center play action passing from him after basically seeing 0 of that for Michael Penix in the previous games, to me is pretty indicative of that. But, we've been talking all season long about, Penix's comfort because he didn't do a lot of under center stuff in college. And whatnot, and that's a reason, not to mention, some of the offensive line issues and the play action stuff. But, speaking of play action, it continues to be much improved, right? Let's look at Penix's success rate off of play action over the last 3 games combined. It's 62%, which would be the 10th best success rate off play action, according to PFF, or at least according to all the plays that PFF says are play action. It's according to True Media. 62% would be the 10th best in the NFL over the last 3 weeks. The Falcons have averaged about 12.4 yards per attempt off of play action passes, which would be number 1 in the last 3 weeks, over that span. And that's up from where they were in the first, I can't do math, 8 weeks, which was a 37% success rate. So 37 to 62%. 37% was ranked 39th, and their yards per attempt in those first 8 weeks was 6.5, which would have been 33rd. So essentially the efficiency numbers, or at least some of the efficiency numbers, basically show that the Falcons, from the first 8 games to the last 3 games, have gone from a bottom 10 play action passing team to a top 10 play action passing team. And so, that's a good thing. Now, I'm sure some of you guys, but Aaron, didn't you say last offseason and throughout the summer that if the Falcons can figure out the play action passing game, this offense is going to thrive? And I would say, yes, I did say that. And as we sit here today, I've been kind of right. Again, maybe not delivering the top 5 offense that we hoped and wanted to see, if that was the case. But we are kind of getting the good version of this Falcons offense, at least one of the better versions of the Falcons offense the last 3 games that we've seen all season long, because they've averaged about 25 points per game in those 3 games, which translates to basically being a top 12 offense in the NFL. And, again, that's not as good as the top 5 to 7 unit that we were hoping for, but top 12 is about, certainly I can only speak for myself, what I thought this team would probably be this year. I think we talked about this in the lead up to the season. I had them at somewhere in that 10 to 12 range, 11, 12. And so that's where they are. And so this is kind of the good version of the Falcons offense. And so it's kind of delivering. It's just not delivering in the way that we all thought it would deliver, in terms of, being an offense that was going to score 30 plus points a game. But the problem is, even though the Falcons offense, you're seeing a better version of the Falcons offense these last couple of weeks. And, to be fair, the play action passing has been very effective early in games and has diminished over time, which contributes to what you've heard Jarvis Davis and myself and Tanisha Patisse say on recent Falcon Squad episodes, where it does feel like this team does a good job making adjustments in game. And that's one of the reasons why they can score 21 points in the first halves against teams like the Bills and the Panthers, and then score 3 points in the second halves of those games, because, they can't essentially stay ahead of the chains when it comes to the back and forth chess match. But, the issue is, even though the Falcons offense is performing, again, whether you think it's up to par or not is debatable, but they're still losing games, is because the defense is giving up, Falcons are scoring 25 points, but the defense is giving up an average of over 28 points per game over the last 3 weeks, which would make you a bottom 3 defense in the NFL. And that is where we'll continue today's Locked On Falcons and talk about exactly why the Falcons defense struggled so much in this game and why Bryce Young was able to carve them up. And that may mean that we might have to say, Jimmy Lake, do we owe you an apology? Are you beating the allegations? We'll explain as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So the NBA season is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or you just want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel's going to have the live bets from everything from who's going to score next to those fourth quarter comebacks. And you can even combine those live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team is making that late game push. So head on over to FanDuel right now, and they're giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Again, that's a $5 bet, and if it wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets. Maybe you use that against the Falcons, who are 1.5-point underdogs against the New Orleans Saints, in large part due to the injuries to Drake London and Michael Penix, with that line moving after those injuries were announced. But if you want to take advantage of this, head on over to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. So in a nutshell, if I want to, we'll say blame, right? Because that's really, why a team is successful is very complicated. But if we're just going to be reductive and get the point across, why did the Falcons struggle so much in this game? Well, they kept only rushing 3 guys. By my count, and maybe I'd have to double check my notes, having charted the Falcons defense every game this year, the Falcons have only rushed 5 times heading into this past Sunday's game. Well, against Carolina in week 11, they rushed 8 times, which is very similar to the 9 times the Falcons rushed 3 in that week 18 game, which we talked about last year, was Jimmy Lake being disrespectful of Bryce Young because he basically had a similar game plan that he had for Desmond Ridder, which is like, we don't believe you can throw the football, and so we're just going to play coverage and not try to heat you up, right? As we've talked about over the years, for those of you that are new here, right? We talk about, like, the only way that you can stop good quarterbacks is getting pressure. And, basically you saying that we don't have to get pressure on you in order to stop you is basically you telling the world that you don't think that person's a good quarterback. And Bryce Young, now twice in a row, or not in a row, but 2 times in the last 3 meetings, has basically said, I took that as a sign of disrespect. I took that personally. And so that's why I say, like, Jimmy Lake might be beating the allegations, because we chalked that up then as a bad game plan by Jimmy Lake that ultimately got him fired after that week 18 matchup last year, the Falcons' former defensive coordinator. Jeff did it again, but Jimmy Lake's defense only gave up 251 yards passing and 3 touchdowns, while Jeff Ulbricht's defense just gave up 448 passing yards with 3 touchdowns. And so we sit here and I go, well, the common denominator is not Jeff Ulbricht, it's Raheem Morris. Is this a Raheem Morris thing? So Raheem, right? Did you throw your guy Jimmy Lake under the bus? I mean, deservedly, like back that thing up on Jimmy Lake. Not what I'm talking about, the bus. But it's one of those things where it's like, Raheem, because it's just baffling for the Falcons to basically be like, we don't rush 3 against the Panthers, and then all of a sudden, like, we're going to rush 3 against the we don't rush 3 against anybody. We're the blitz happiest team in the NFL. We're constantly sending 5 guys, and then all of a sudden, like, we're just going to rush 3. I don't get it, right? And again, like, it'd be like, maybe there's data out there that says that rushing 3 and dropping 8 with Bryce Young is a good strategy because it doesn't work. But, like, again, I don't watch every Panthers game. I just watch a couple of games in the lead up to whenever the Falcons play them. So, I've seen probably a dozen Bryce Young games over the last couple of years. At no point have I been like, oh yeah, like, he can't handle drop 8 coverage. It's like, I've never watched a film where other defenses have been like, oh yeah, he can't handle drop 8 coverages. Expect the Falcons to drop 8. And then the Falcons come out here the last couple of times and like, we're going to drop 8. And it's like, I don't get it. But, given the questionable game plan, you also did not have good execution on the part of the Falcons, particularly in the secondary. We all know Natrone Brooks struggled, but kind of everybody in the secondary struggled. I think you could also argue that this was the worst game that AJ Terrell's had this season, the worst game that Billy Bowman's had this season, and maybe even the worst game that Xavier Watts has had this season. Now, based off my charting of the defense, Natrone Brooks gave up 128 yards receiving as the primary coverage guy in this game. But, that's a lot. Don't get me wrong. That's a bad game. That still means there's 320 yards to go for the rest of the secondary. So if you were just going to sit there and say, oh, like the reason why the Falcons struggled is because of Natrone Brooks, it's like, yes, he was the primary culprit, but there were also secondary, tertiary, and quaternary culprits as well, because of those other 320 yards allowed that weren't on Natrone Brooks. Based off my charting, about 70% of that went to AJ, Billy Bowman, or Xavier Watts. And so we will see. Now, normally this would be the time where I go on an anti-Billy Bowman rant, but I'm going to save that. We're going to circle this. We're going to probably revisit this specific game as part of the conversation about the Falcons and what they need to do to address their cornerback needs in January and February when we get to the positional reviews that we do every year. But essentially, AJ struggled against Ted McMillan. We know AJ struggles against size. Falcons need to go out there and get an outside corner that can handle the size so that AJ doesn't have to deal with Ted McMillan again. And then the question is going to be if and when the Falcons upgrade the other cornerback position, is Billy Bowman going to be the guy that offenses are attacking? Similar to how the last couple of weeks we've talked about, Natrone Brooks was circled in this game. Mike Hughes has been circled the last several weeks, right? And so if the Falcons do upgrade that outside corner, teams are going to circle somebody else, and Billy Bowman is probably the most obvious candidate, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it in 2026. So, overall, last thoughts on the defense, given this poor performance, is kind of reflective of the general trend of the Falcons defense the last month. They just have not been very good on defense, and we'll see if they can bounce back with Divine Diablo potentially coming back. But we now have 10 games of the Falcons defense. The first 5 games, they were great. Last 5 games, not so great, right? If you look at the advanced metrics like expected points added or EPA, the first 5 games, they were 5th best defense in the NFL in terms of EPA per play allowed. In the last 5 games, they're 27th. So basically top 5 to bottom 6 defense. And so the question for the next 7 games is going to be which version of the Falcons defense. Will the real Falcons defense stand up? Are we going to, if one end of the spectrum is a bottom 5 defense, the other end of the spectrum is a top 5 defense, where do we plot these next 7 games? That's going to really be indicative of what this defense really is. And again, hopefully, the break point in that first 5 games was the first 5 games that Diablo was healthy. He got injured early in that 49ers game, which was the 6th game of the season. And then we missed him for most of that game and the subsequent 4 games. And so are we just going to instantly getting him back in the lineup going to morph back into a top 5 defense, or do we get somewhere in between? Whatever. So that to me is going to be an ongoing conversation because, again, I think some of the conversation around this team and where they need to improve, I think a lot of people look at this defense and say, oh, like this defense is good and it's good to go and they just need to grow and develop. And it's like, sure, that will absolutely help. But at the same time, if these next 7 games, they're like let's say the 21st best defense in the NFL, like we're going to have a lot more games of bad defense for the Falcons than good defense. And so we can look at those first 5 games and be like, man, what a time to be alive. You remember that when Ulbrich was cooking like that, but that doesn't describe the entire body of work for the team, and the team hopefully will go into the offseason. If that's the case, again, if they go out there and ball out these next couple of weeks, we will have a different conversation. But hopefully the team will not go into this offseason and do their usual complacency and be like, oh, well, we already have a top 10 defense when it's healthy. And it's like, okay, we'll see. So we'll see how they perform over the next 7 games defensively. That will be something that we'll probably focus a lot more on because we are definitely not that invested in the offense now that Michael Penix has been shut down at least for the next 4 weeks. So we will see on that. That is going to do it for us here on this All 22 review. We will have an extended All 22 review for the Locked On Falcons Insiders, which will be breaking down some of the film. So if you don't like hearing me talk about these plays and you would like to see me break down these plays, you can do so by becoming a Locked On Falcons Insider at the link in the description below. We'll be looking at Michael Penix. We'll probably do a little bit of Kirk Cousins again. And we'll look at this defense, and you will be hearing me crying on the microphone. because I know it's another month I don't get to talk about Michael Penix. So I'm going to be sad on the inside. So please become a Locked On Falcons insider. Come cheer me up. It's free right now. It's 14-day free trial. When you hit that link in the description below, then it's $4.99 a month thereafter. So I would appreciate you guys coming by and cheering me up by becoming a Locked On Falcons insider. So that is in store for you. That should drop probably tomorrow for the insiders on Wednesday. And then we'll be back with a crossover Thursday tomorrow on Wednesday night here on YouTube, Thursday on your audio feeds with Locked On Saints Ross Jackson to preview this Week 12 epic battle between Kirk Cousins and Tyler Shuck. And I don't know if the Falcons have the better quarterback in this battle. Oh, boy. Oh, we're having so much fun, guys. Oh, man. But, hey, I appreciate all of you. We're going to do our best. We're going to do our best for these next 7 games of just downright depression and misery and whatnot. But we're going to do our best. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And, of course, for your second listen, check out Locked On NFL. They're going to have you geared up for the rest of this Week 12 action. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network in the galaxy, your team every day.